What does it look like to do what's right when everyone around you does what's wrong? In a world ruled by idol worship, corruption, and fear, one man chose a different path. King Hezekiah inherited a kingdom full of compromise, yet he walked in righteousness. While other kings bowed to pressure, Hezekiah bowed to God. His story is one of bold reform, unshakable prayer, and miraculous deliverance. But even the faithful stumble, and in the end, Hezekiah's greatest test didn't come from his enemies, but from within. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel where we bring powerful Bible stories to life with vivid storytelling, spiritual depth, and truth that applies today. Hezekiah became king at just 25 years old. His father, King Ahaz, had led Judah into ruin, erecting altars to foreign gods, closing the doors of the temple, and sacrificing his own sons in fire. Darkness had settled over the nation, but with Hezekiah, the story took a sudden turn. 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 3 says, "He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done." That's a powerful statement, especially considering the generations of compromise that came before him. Hezekiah wasn't walking in the footsteps of his father Ahaz. He reached back to the example of King David, the man after God's own heart. The first thing Hezekiah did was radical. He reopened the temple. In 2 Chronicles chapter 29 verse 3 it says, "In the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them." He didn't delay. He didn't gather public opinion. He knew it had to be done, and he acted swiftly. He called the priests and Levites together and told them to consecrate themselves and cleanse the house of the Lord. Years of neglect and idolatry had polluted the temple, but Hezekiah saw its restoration as a priority, not just for worship, but for national healing. Hezekiah was a reformer with a reverent heart. He reinstituted the Passover, which had been neglected for generations. He invited not just the people of Judah, but also remnants from Israel to return to Jerusalem and celebrate the Lord together. 2 Chronicles chapter 30 verse 26 says, "There was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon son of David king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem." Hezekiah didn't just clean up the outward mess. He reestablished spiritual order. What set Hezekiah apart was not political skill, military power, or charisma. It was his deep trust in God. 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 5 tells us he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. That's a bold claim. No one like him. And why? Because he held fast to the Lord and did not cease to follow him. He kept the commands the Lord had given Moses. As a result, the Bible says, "And the Lord was with him." He was successful in whatever he undertook. Hezekiah's faithfulness had real impact. Idols were torn down. Worship was restored. God's presence returned to Judah. But following God isn't just about beginnings, it's about endurance. And though Hezekiah started well, his journey would lead through terrifying threats, personal sickness, and the dangers of pride. Still, in this first chapter, we meet a man unafraid to go against the flow. A king who did what was right, not what was easy. Hezekiah reminds us that it's never too late to change a nation when a heart is fully surrendered to God. When King Hezekiah stepped into leadership, the kingdom of Judah was drowning in idolatry. Pagan shrines stood on every hill. The temple of the Lord was locked and abandoned. Generations had passed without proper worship, and the people's hearts were far from God. But Hezekiah wasn't content to let that continue. He didn't just want to reign, he wanted to reform. 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 4 says, "He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles." These were the visible symbols of rebellion against God: altars dedicated to Baal, groves devoted to fertility gods, and incense offerings to celestial powers. Hezekiah did not negotiate with these idols, he destroyed them. Perhaps most shocking of all, he even broke apart the bronze serpent that Moses had made in the wilderness. Over time, the people had begun to worship it, burning incense to it as if it had power apart from God. 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 4 tells us, "He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it." It was called Nehushtan. This was bold leadership. The bronze serpent was a sacred relic, a piece of Israel's history. But Hezekiah understood something crucial. Even a good thing can become a god if it's not kept in its place. He would not allow anything, no matter how traditional or familiar, to take God's place in the hearts of the people. The next step was cleansing the temple. It had been shut for years, gathering dust, defiled by neglect. Hezekiah summoned the Levites and priests and gave them a charge recorded in 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 5. Listen to me, Levites. Consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all defilement from the sanctuary. For 16 days they worked, carrying out filth, scrubbing altars, restoring utensils, and reconsecrating the holy space. Then Hezekiah reinstituted worship. Burnt offerings were resumed. Music returned to the temple, and the people gathered in awe. They sang, they bowed, and they brought thank offerings. Revival had begun, but Hezekiah didn't stop there. He sent messengers throughout the land, even to the remnants of the northern kingdom of Israel, inviting them to come to Jerusalem and celebrate Passover. Some mocked, others wept, but many came. The gathering was larger than anyone expected. 2 Chronicles chapter 30 verse 26 records, "There was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon son of David king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem." It wasn't just about ceremonies, it was about hearts returning to God. Hezekiah's reforms weren't cosmetic. He knew worship wasn't just about what happened in the temple, it was about what ruled in the heart. So he led a purge throughout the land, tearing down any remaining altars, high places, and images of false gods, not just in Judah, but in parts of Israel as well. Hezekiah was restoring more than worship, he was restoring covenant. The people were remembering who they were, and more importantly, whose they were. They were not just citizens of a crumbling kingdom, they were the people of the living God. In a time of moral decline and spiritual compromise, Hezekiah stood as a man who said, "Not on my watch." He chose faith over fear, obedience over convenience, and covenant over culture. And because he did, the presence of God returned to the land. But soon, this restored kingdom would face its greatest external threat. An empire was coming, one that crushed nations with ease. Hezekiah had rebuilt worship. Now he would have to trust the God he worshipped to save them. Revival was in the air. The temple had been restored, worship renewed, idols destroyed. The people were turning their hearts back to God under Hezekiah's leadership. But then the enemy came. The mighty Assyrian Empire, led by King Sennacherib, was sweeping across the region like a storm. Nation after nation fell before their armies. Cities were burned. Kings were humiliated. And now their eyes turned to Jerusalem. In 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 13, it says, "In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib king of Assyria attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. One by one, Hezekiah watched as strongholds fell. Now, Jerusalem stood alone, surrounded, vulnerable, and outmatched. But Hezekiah did not panic. He prepared. He secured the water supply by rerouting the Gihon spring through a secret tunnel into the city, a marvel of engineering that still exists today. He reinforced the walls and gathered weapons. He appointed military officers and encouraged the people. But more than anything, he turned to God. 2 Chronicles chapter 32 verses 7 through 8 records his words to the people. "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him. For there is a greater power with us than with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." What courage! What faith! Hezekiah understood that numbers don't determine victory, God does. But Assyria wasn't done. Sennacherib sent his field commander with a message meant to shake the people's faith. The envoy stood outside the city walls and shouted for all to hear. He mocked their trust in Egypt. He ridiculed their reliance on the Lord. He even claimed that the Lord himself had told Assyria to destroy Judah. 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 29 captures the threat. This is what the king says: "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you from my hand." The enemy tried to sow fear, doubt, and division. But Hezekiah didn't answer the taunts. He went higher. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and went to the temple. He sent word to the prophet Isaiah, and then he prayed. 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 15 records his prayer. O Lord God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, O Lord, and hear. Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all kingdoms on earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. It wasn't a prayer of fear, it was a prayer of faith. And God answered. Through the prophet Isaiah, the Lord declared that Sennacherib would not enter the city, would not shoot an arrow, would not build a ramp, would not set foot inside. God himself would defend Jerusalem. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. By morning, the enemy was gone. Sennacherib returned to Nineveh defeated, humiliated, and eventually killed by his own sons. Jerusalem was saved not by swords, but by prayer. Not by power, but by trust. Hezekiah faced a giant empire and stood his ground not because of his strength, but because of his surrender. His faith wasn't in walls or weapons, but in the God who had always delivered his people. He tore down idols. He restored worship. And when the enemy surrounded the city, he chose to kneel. And that changed everything. Hezekiah had seen God move in power. When the Assyrians threatened to crush Jerusalem, he went to the temple and laid the enemy's words before the Lord. And God responded with a miracle. One angel, one night, 185,000 enemies gone. But now the battle wasn't outside the walls. It was inside his body. Sometime after Assyria's defeat, King Hezekiah became deathly ill. The details are not recorded, but the illness was serious enough that he was bedridden and told to prepare for death. 2 Kings chapter 20 verse 1 says, In those days Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah son of Amoz went to him and said, This is what the Lord says, put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover. It was a sobering moment. The same man who had seen the Lord destroy armies was now face to face with his own mortality. And this time the warning came directly from God. But Hezekiah didn't argue. He didn't resist. Instead, he turned his face to the wall and prayed. Verse 2 says, Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. No grand speech, no royal decree, just a king, alone with his God, pouring out his heart. In verse 3 he says, Remember, O Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion, and have done what is good in your eyes. And then he wept bitterly. This wasn't a manipulative prayer. It was honest. It was raw. It was the cry of a man who still believed that God was able even in the face of death. And before Isaiah had even left the palace courtyard, God answered. Verse 5 records the Lord's response. Go back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you. On the third day from now, you will go up to the temple of the Lord. And then the promise, I will add 15 years to your life. God didn't just heal Hezekiah, he extended his legacy. To confirm the promise, God gave Hezekiah a sign. The king had asked for a visible assurance that the healing was real. So Isaiah prayed, and the Lord caused the shadow on the sundial to go backward 10 steps. Time itself reversed, a miracle written not in battle, but in the movement of the sun. Hezekiah recovered, and the temple once again heard his voice in worship. His life had been spared, his fate rewritten, all because of one simple broken prayer. It's easy to think of Hezekiah as a man of strength, and he was. But in this moment, his power was not in what he could control, but in his willingness to surrender. He turned his face to the wall, not in defeat, but in dependence. He sought the same God who had saved his nation, believing he could save his life too. And God did. This chapter reminds us that no matter how dire the situation, prayer still moves the heart of God. Tears still matter. And healing still happens when we humble ourselves. Hezekiah's story wasn't over. His extended years would bring both fruit and failure. But in this moment, he teaches us something priceless, that even when death comes knocking, the door is not closed until God says it is. Hezekiah had seen miracles that few ever witness. He had torn down the idols of a nation, restored worship in the temple, prayed for divine protection, and watched God wipe out an army. When death knocked at his own door, his prayer moved heaven and God extended his life by 15 years. But sometimes the greatest test comes not in suffering, but in success. After his miraculous healing, word of Hezekiah's recovery spread far beyond Judah. One empire took special interest, Babylon. At that time, Babylon was not yet the global superpower it would become, but its ambitions were rising. When they heard that Hezekiah had been sick and recovered, they sent envoys with letters and a gift. It seemed harmless, a diplomatic gesture, a sign of goodwill, but it carried with it a test far deeper than any battle Hezekiah had fought. 2 Kings chapter 20 verse 13 says, Hezekiah received the messengers and showed them all that was in his storehouses, the silver, the gold, the spices, and the fine olive oil, his armory, and everything found among his treasures. There was nothing in his palace or in all his kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them. At first glance, this might seem like hospitality, but it wasn't. It was pride. Hezekiah had allowed his heart to shift. Instead of directing attention to the God who had saved and blessed him, he put his wealth and power on display. The treasures of the palace were no longer just provisions, they'd become proof of his greatness. And God saw it. Isaiah the prophet soon arrived with a question that pierced through the appearance of things. In verse 14 he asked, "What did they see in your palace?" Hezekiah replied, "They saw everything in my palace. There is nothing among my treasures that I did not show them." Isaiah's response was sobering. In verses 16 through 18 he said, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, and some of your descendants will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." The judgment was clear. Hezekiah's pride had opened the door to future loss. What he had flaunted, his descendants would forfeit. But here's the tragic part. Verse 19 says, "The word of the Lord you have spoken is good," Hezekiah replied. For he thought, will there not be peace and security in my lifetime? After all he had done after the revival, the reform, the prayers, and the deliverance, Hezekiah's legacy faltered not in war, but in selfishness. His concern was for peace in his days, not the consequences that would fall on the next generation. It's a heavy reminder even great men can falter. Even faithful leaders can allow pride to creep in, and even miracles can be forgotten when self-interest takes the throne of the heart. Still, the Bible does not erase Hezekiah's victories. 2 Chronicles chapter 32 verse 33 says Hezekiah rested with his ancestors, and they buried him on the hill where the tombs of David's descendants are. All Judah and the people of Jerusalem honored him when he died. He was remembered as a righteous king, a reformer, and a man who trusted God. But his story also stands as a warning that a strong beginning does not guarantee a faithful finish. Hezekiah teaches us to tear down idols, pray boldly, and trust God in crisis, but also to guard our hearts in seasons of prosperity. Because sometimes the quiet test of pride can echo louder than the roar of war. If this story gave you a deeper view of Hezekiah's journey, and your own, don't forget to subscribe for more Bible stories brought to life with heart, honesty, and clarity.
Shalom, brothers and sisters. Did you know we have an online store? It's called theroyalremnant.com. We have a variety of clothing and home decor items. Explore our sweatshirts. We have a few different designs and multiple color options. Or navigate to our home decor section and check out our candle designs. We have candles that read Shalom and some that read All Praises to the Most High. If you don't see something you love at the moment, sign up for our email list to learn of new items. Grab your free Bible story coloring pages, and your email will be added to our list. Thank you for your support. It encourages us to keep making content and merchandise to boldly share our faith. Shalom.